All right, so we will go ahead and get started. And like I mentioned, people who are just joining us, go ahead and say a quick hello in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, your connection to Safe Routes to School. If you have one, we'd love to hear that as well, just to get a sense of who's in the space with us today. And yeah, this is our second webinar in our Walk, Ride, and Roll webinar series. So we kicked off the series in the fall with a webinar all about Safe Routes to School, 101, just kind of talking a bit about the basics of Safe Routes to School. And today we're going to be talking all about arrival and dismissal, which is always a hot topic, complicated topic in the Safe Routes to School world. So we're excited to, dive in and hopefully share some ideas and resources. So again, the chat will stay open throughout the whole presentation. Feel free to, share some of your thoughts, ideas, resources that you might have. We are recording this presentation and we will have the presentation slides available for you all after we're done today. So if you missed something or didn't get a chance to, fully immerse yourself in everything, don't worry. We'll send out the link to the recording and all the slide presentations after we wrap up for today. So keep an eye out for that. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Corey Johnson, our Program and Engagement Manager here at Safe Routes Partnership. I will be our main presenter today. And for those of you who might be new to the partnership, just a bit about our organization. So we are a national nonprofit. So we work all across the country. And our mission is to advance safe walking and rolling to schools and other everyday destinations, whether it's parks, grocery stores, libraries. And the goal is really to improve the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, abilities, and disabilities, and really build healthy, thriving communities for everyone. So if you're new, welcome. And if you're not new, nice to see you all again. And like I mentioned, I'm Corey Johnson. I'm zooming in from DC today. It's a nice, cool day, but sunny day. And I'm joined by two other presenters. We'll also have Deshandi Coombs, who's the school organizer with Transportation Alternatives in New York City, and Jackson Chabot, who's the director of advocacy and organizing and open plans also in New York. So yeah, I'm excited to present alongside Jackson and Deshandi and learn a bit about what's happening in New York. And again, just continue to introduce yourselves in the chat, say hello, and we will go ahead and dive right in. So I wanted to start out with a poll just to get a sense from you all about how arrival and dismissal is working in your communities. So the first question that we want to know is just what are some of your top concerns around arrival and dismissal? I'm sure there are many. Is it traffic congestion? Is it air quality or idling? Is it electric vehicles? I know that, in some communities where electric vehicles, they can be really quiet. So, students can't hear when there are cars coming. Dangerous driving behaviors, not enough crossing guards, just not enough staff to manage everything, lack of infrastructure, or is it something else? So go ahead and just add your ideas to the poll. If you have any other ideas in the chat, feel free to put those in as well. And I'll give it about 10 more seconds to get your choice in. All right, so I'll go ahead and end this, and see there are a few more people who are jumping in, so I'll give you all 5 more seconds. Okay. So it looks like we have a lot of concerns, whether it's traffic congestion, dangerous driving behaviors, lack of infrastructure, some idling and air quality issues, just not enough people to manage arrival dismissal, whether it's not enough crossing guards or support staff or volunteers. So this is something that we really see across the board in really small communities to some of our largest communities. So if you are experiencing arrival and dismissal challenges or concerns, you are not the only one. So this is something that we see a lot. And we are also curious about, I'll go ahead and launch our second poll here, about who makes the decisions around arrival and dismissal procedures in your school or in the schools that you work with. So I think that a lot of coming up with some of these solutions is kind of figuring out, how these decisions are made, who's involved, who you should be talking to, who has the influence to do certain things, because we know that with arrival dismissal, it really takes everybody to kind of coordinate and communicate around a successful process and system. So in the school or the schools where you work, who is really driving that process? And again, I'll give you all a few seconds to get your ideas in. And again, feel free to add your ideas in the chat. We take about 5 more seconds. All right, so I will go ahead and close this one. So as far as decision makers, again, so just looking at what you all put in the poll, it seems like there are a lot of school administrators or school districts who are kind of the main decision makers around arrival and dismissal procedures. And we find that, that happens a lot. In some other cases, there are parents and caregivers, some support staff, some of you who are safe routes to school coordinators might be involved in this process. And then some of you are just not sure, and that's fine. So, your next step might be to figure out who actually is in charge of making these decisions in your school or the schools that you work with. So yeah, it's just always helpful to kind of know, who's in the space and who's in the room, so you can figure out who to get in contact with to hopefully make some improvements around arrival and dismissal. So I will go ahead and stop sharing here, and I am paying attention to the chat box. It moves pretty quickly, but I do see it. So I'm just seeing some other comments around other concerns, like double parking. Schools are located really close to highways. Seeing that there are some safe routes to school coordinators who are involved in the decision-making process, having to coordinate with lots of different partners. So yeah, there's a lot happening here, but hopefully we can tackle some of these topics today. So I first want to start out just by talking about some, arrival and dismissal basics. And these might be things that you're already familiar with, things that you're already doing, but it's always nice to kind of, all get on the same page around the basic principles and concepts around arrival and dismissal. So just first off, why are we focused on this? Why is it important? So we know that family car trips make up a lot of morning congestion. Family car trips have been, increasing, especially coming out of, the lockdown, with bus shortages or parents who are, don't want to put their students on a bus, or for students who can't walk or roll. It's leading to a lot of increased car congestion. Arrival dismissal also just creates a really high stress environment. There's a lot going on. There are buses, there are cars, there are kids walking, there are kids rolling, there are kids, on scooters, kids who are traveling using wheelchairs. So it can be a really stressful environment. We also know that that can have really negative effects on both student safety and the learning environment. Having to go into school and, trying to navigate how to actually get into the school building and not, get hit by a car, or, just trying to make your way to school safely. That doesn't really make you feel good once you actually enter the building, having to come from that really stressful, negative environment. And we also know that chaotic arrival and dismissals just discourages walking and rolling. I've talked to families who've said that they don't want their child to walk or roll to school because it is kind of chaotic, because there's speeding or there's a lot of car traffic, and they just, feel safer, having their student, being driven to school. So that's why I wanted to really focus on this topic. And it is a challenging topic to tackle. But in the midst of all that, madness, there are some really great opportunities to, improve arrival and dismissal. And thinking about kind of the, environment now, with the high transportation costs and bus shortages, that can actually be used to, to frame conversations around improving arrival and dismissal. So if we can make it safer for students to walk and roll to school, does that mean that we can have less bus, like a smaller bus fleet, or less parents having to spend a lot of money, on gas and transportation costs driving their students to school? We also know there's more funding in general for bike ped infrastructure. So I know you all have heard about the, infrastructure bill and those opportunities to, improve and enhance infrastructure. So can we think about projects, infrastructure projects around school campuses that actually do help improve arrival and dismissal for students walking and rolling? There's also an increased focus on climate and air qualities. How can we incorporate some of those topics into arrival and dismissal procedures and try to change those behaviors to make sure that we are thinking about the climate too, the air that we breathe, the air that students are breathing, and just the overall health of our environment and our earth. There's also just an increased interest in walking and rolling, having more community connectivity, being able to walk and roll to schools, to other everyday destinations. So how can you incorporate some of that interest into improving arrival and dismissal? And then also we just noted again, this current environment, it's not safe, it's not comfortable, it's not enjoyable. I don't know if there's anybody who has a really great time, sitting in a car loop or trying to navigate arrival and dismissal, in the midst of a really chaotic environment. So how can we take this opportunity to try to make it safer and more comfortable and more enjoyable for everybody? So when you think about arrival and dismissal, we really want to make sure that student safety is the priority, especially for students who are walking, biking, and rolling. And we often hear around arrival and dismissal that a lot of arrival dismissal procedures and systems are very, car-centric, car-focused, and the students who are walking, rolling, or biking might not be, their safety might not be prioritized. So we do want to make sure that we talk about arrival and dismissal. The real ultimate goal is to make sure that everybody is safe. And I think that that's something, that message around safety is something that everybody can really rally behind. We want to make sure that people are having a safe experience during arrival and dismissal. At the same time, we also know that arrival and dismissal can not only be safe, but also be a really joyful experience. So it doesn't just have to be, you just, walk right into school and, get started. Getting started with your school day, can be joyful. So for their students who are, like pumped to, go to class and see their teachers and their friends, arrival can be a part of that process. It can be, fun and joyful and inspiring. And for those students who are at the end of the school day, they're, the biggest joy is that the day is ended and they're ready to go hang out with friends, not be in school anymore. That can also be a joyful experience, being able to, walk home with your friends, ride your bike home with your friends, or just have a nice, peaceful and joyful end to your school day. So, don't discount joy as another really really important part of improving arrival and dismissal. So safety and joy can coexist. So thinking about some key concepts for arrival and dismissal, I mentioned one already, which is really prioritizing students who are walking and rolling, use a variety of approaches together. So we know that this might not be like a one-size-fits-all solution. There might be lots of different elements that you can incorporate into a plan that improves arrival and dismissal. Also taking separate modes into account. So we know that there will probably be some students who are being driven to school, students who are walking, students who are rolling, students who are carpooling. So just consider that you will, no matter what your situation is, you'll probably be planning for people who are using separate modes to travel to and from school. Also clearly communicate where everybody goes. So again, we know that there are different modes, there are different campus designs and setups, and there's a lot going on during arrival and dismissal. So it's really important to think about, how you communicate where everybody goes and where everybody should be. So some of like those, operational strategies are a really important part of arrival and dismissal. And then lastly, but certainly not least, engaging the community in the process. So as I've said before, arrival and dismissal, it involves lots of different moving parts, lots of different people from, students and families, school staff. Arrival and dismissal might also affect, community members, neighbors, local businesses, other buildings that are located near school campuses. It might be a park or a library or a rec center. So really making sure that everybody who's, kind of in and around the school campus is engaged in this process, because it really does affect everybody involved. So just thinking a bit about what this looks like. So what do these concepts look like in practice? So I mentioned earlier that some of these are, engineering strategies. We know that there are certain engineering strategies that do make it safer for students to walk and roll to school. So could those be incorporated into an arrival and dismissal plan? Whether that's, making sure there are sidewalks or bike lanes or pavement markings or crosswalks or signage to make sure that students can actually walk and roll to school safely. There are also those operational strategies, like I mentioned before, making sure that you have, the staff that you need, that there is a arrival and dismissal plan, that plan is clearly communicated, and that's probably where you'll work pretty closely with, school administrators, possibly district, school district staff, and other people who might help to, kind of run and manage the arrival and dismissal process. So those strategies are important as well. There are also education campaigns, so things to really promote positive behaviors for people who are walking, rolling, and driving. And, those can include, lots of different things. I've seen, like high school students make campaigns, around positive driving behaviors, even things like no idling or air quality awareness campaigns to let people know, like if you're just idling in your car, it actually does impact the people who are around you. It impacts the environment. Can we not do that and come up with a better, strategy to make sure that we're, staying safe and healthy? So education campaigns can be a part of this as well. Incentive programs, so making it, kind of sweetening the pot for students who are walking and rolling to school. Sometimes they're, competitions, classroom competitions, or you can, earn something if you walk and roll to school. So that could be a possible strategy. Consistent school-wide messaging. So again, making sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to arrival and dismissal. And again, those conversations with community members. And we found that a lot of this work really does come down to that relationship building piece, making sure that everybody is on the same page and, trying to align people's priorities. And so just a few key steps for arrival and dismissal that I wanted to walk through. So first is assessing existing conditions, working with partners to identify potential solutions, creating your plan, communicating that plan clearly, implementing these changes, and then adjusting accordingly. So when we think about, kind of assessing those existing conditions, some of you might be used to doing arrival and dismissal observations. So you go out in the morning, go out in the afternoon, and kind of just get a sense of what's happening. How many students are walking, how many students are rolling, what is the car flow like, how many students are being driven, what is the infrastructure like, where do the buses go, just really getting a sense of what's actually happening during these times of the day. And I actually have a link in the slide deck to an observation field guide from Safe Routes to School, Virginia. There are a bunch of others I'm sure that exist, but that kind of gives you a sense of things you should be looking for. It's also helpful to have a few other people who are doing these observations with you because there are so many different areas to cover and there's a lot going on during arrival and dismissal. Having, different people who can kind of get a sense of what's happening in different areas is really helpful. And then of course, there's talking to, students, parents, caregivers, school staff, bus drivers, and again, neighbors. We know that arrival and dismissal impacts people in neighborhoods too, whether it's, people parking in neighborhoods or blocking a street or double parking or we know that neighbors are affected too, even if they don't have students at a school. So how can they be involved in this process as well? Documenting unsafe behaviors by people, who might be driving, walking, or rolling. There might be students who might not know, some of the safe behaviors for riding a bike or crossing a street, or people who are driving who are just, being really dangerous and reckless. So documenting, what those instances look like, and then inviting others to observe as well. Like I mentioned before, just having, getting other perspectives is always really helpful in this process. And then you really start working together to develop solutions. So again, like I mentioned before, because there's so many people involved in this process that, the solutions kind of have to, everybody has to kind of, cooperate, collaborate, get on the same board, get on the same page. Again, not saying this is easy, especially if there are people who have, different priorities, but everybody kind of has to come together in order to create a solution. So the administrators, parents, caregivers, support staff, district if they need to be involved, students, like I mentioned, neighbors, local businesses. So I'll share an example in a few minutes about a local business that was involved in an arrival and dismissal solution. So who needs to be on board as a part of developing these solutions and making the ultimate decisions? And then you really create your plan. And sometimes this involves multiple plans. So do you need to create an engineering plan to get the infrastructure needed to improve arrival and dismissal, a circulation plan to make sure that everybody knows who's going where during arrival and dismissal? So, you know, how are the cars flowing? How are students walking, flowing through, you know, the area? How are students biking, flowing through the area? What does that look like? And there's a resource that I'll link to that has some sample circulation plans. If you're all are kind of like, what do you mean circulation plan? What does that look like? I'll share a resource with you that has some great examples of what circulation plans look like. Communication plans. So again, thinking about that consistent messaging around arrival and dismissal. So knowing where people go, when people go, you know, to certain places. That communications plan is helpful. So will you be sending out flyers? Are there school newsletters? Are there morning announcements? How will people know what the arrival and dismissal procedures are? So that communications plan is really key. Again, that community engagement plan as well. So thinking about improving arrival and dismissal. Who do you need to talk to? When do you talk to them? Are you just having informal conversations? Are you doing surveys? Are you doing focus groups? Are you going to meetings? You know, what does that process look like? And then of course, those key stakeholder action steps. So, you know, once you kind of, you know, create all these plans, you know, what are those next steps and how are you actually going to implement all of this? And of course, there's actually implementing the changes. So, you know, we know that there are some changes that might be long-term. Obviously, engineering takes a long time. So we know that, you know, any sort of, you know, change to, you know, the actual physical infrastructure around the school, you know, might take some time. So consider that when you're thinking about, you know, next steps. Even things like staff capacity could take a while just to get people, you know, on board, you know, and get people in certain roles and where they need to be. Also school siting and design, you know, some of this might just be, you know, related to the actual design or space where your school is. So if there's a school that's right off a highway or a school that's just in a place that's not easily walkable or rollable, you know, that might be, you know, that might be another long-term change. So in your district, really trying to think about how school siting and design can be improved to make sure that students can actually walk and roll to school and they don't need to be driven or take a bus to school. You know, and then there are also those short-term changes. So, you know, even things like, you know, using traffic cones, you know, to mark off different areas, designate different places for people to be, pavement markings, things like having bike and scooter racks available. So if there are students who actually want to, you know, bike or roll to school, they have, you know, storage facilities in order to, you know, make that an easier process and a safer process for them. Remote drop-off and pickup programs. So, you know, instead of having the car loop, if there are people who do need to drive, they might park in a different area. Education campaigns and also tactical urbanism projects. So using temporary materials to kind of test out, you know, some new infrastructure could also be a nice short-term change that could have really big impacts on improving arrival and dismissal. And then lastly, it's really important to evaluate how things went. So, you know, you make some changes, try out a few different ideas and strategies. And, you know, as far as that process, you should probably conduct some follow-up observations, you know, again, just to, you know, get a sense of, is this working? Is this not working? Like, you know, we did a remote drop off or pickup, you know, did that work? Is this the right spot? Do we need to change anything? Talking to students, families, staff, community partners, community members. So again, keeping the lines of communication open and thinking about, you know, what's working not working for who, what do we need to change or adjust? And of course, just adjusting or changing or adding strategies as needed. So again, we know this is a, you know, dynamic process. Things won't stay the same through the whole, you know, throughout the whole time. It's okay to adjust things. It's okay to change things as needed. That's a part of the process. And so lastly, I wanted to share a case study. There's a parent who had emailed me when he got the information about this webinar, and he couldn't join, but he asked me if I could, share this case study from his school where his kids go in Oregon. It's an elementary school. I don't know exactly where or the name of the elementary school, but he was able to successfully make some changes around arrival and dismissal at the school. So basically in this situation, there is a PTA who's very involved in arrival and dismissal procedures. And the PTA wanted to organize a formal car loop and place all the bike racks behind the school. They said it was because they could be safely away from cars, but it kind of seemed like, they're trying to prioritize, driving, students being driven to school as opposed to students who bike to school. And this particular school does have a lot of students who regularly bike to school. So it has a, ingrained biking culture there. So the school also has a school bike club, and the bike club basically petitioned the PTA for an alternative solution. So they said, we don't want to do a car loop, like there must be something else we can do. So the bike club went and presented to the PTA and basically said, if the PTA organizes a car loop, like you'll have to have volunteers for that. There's a lot to control, like there are liability concerns. Maybe that's not the route that we should be going. Let's look at another, alternative solution that's not so focused on cars and prioritizing people in cars. So they came up with a solution which they called Park a Grade Away, which is exactly what it sounds like. So their main message was, if you have to drive, please park a grade away and walk the rest. Meaning that, for fifth grade students, they would park, those students would park, or families would park 5 blocks away, third grade, 3 blocks away, kindergarten would get parked closest to the school. I assume if you have students in multiple grades, you can choose, but it gave families a frame of reference for where they should be parking in these different zones. So if you have a 5th grader, you'll park 5 blocks away from the school and walk and roll the rest. 3rd grader, 3 blocks away, walk and roll the rest. Kindergarten, closest to the school. They also got permission from a local business to use that as like the remote drop off and pickup spot. So there was like a local business that wasn't operating during school hours. The business owner said, sure, parents can come in, and caregivers can come and park their, cars here, and then walk and roll with students to school, then come back and, continue on. So there was like that coordination with local business as well. So yeah, that was their solution they piloted, and they actually ended up having a lot of success with that. So they distributed flyers for 4 weeks, and then intermittently as needed. So people kind of got used to that idea of, oh, park a grade away, park a grade away. Thankfully, they had some really great, like, catchy messaging that they were able to, kind of use as a communication strategy, marketing strategy, if you will. So people kind of got the idea of what park a grade away actually means. They also got more bike racks installed in front of the building. So again, the PTA wanted to have them in the back of the building. And with this new solution of, kind of like being less car centric, they got more bike racks in front of the building. And the bike club also organized a Friday bike train where they invited students and families to bike to school on Fridays. So that was one solution to an arrival and dismissal challenge that the school had faced. And again, this is something that fits with this school community and that was really led by a parent and caregiver group. So I'm sure there was coordination from administrators as well, but the bike club kind of really took charge of developing that solution. Just a few things to kind of keep in mind and takeaways from that case study. The first is that it's really important to just tailor the solution to your school community. So this worked in this particular community because there was a bike club in place. There was already a large number of students who were biking. The PTA was, kind of in charge of this process. So this is something that's very tied to the school community. This solution might not work in your school community, and that's okay, but it's really about finding what works in your situation and for your school community. I'd also say to work within existing structures. So again, in this case, there was a PTA, there was the bike club. In your school, there might be a wellness committee or safe routes to school committee, or a climate justice committee or another group that might have some sort of leverage and investment in improving arrival and dismissal. So think about, kind of what already exists within your school community, and think about how you can, leverage that structure and work within it to improve arrival and dismissal. And then, of course, connect with the decision makers. So in this case, the PTA was really involved in arrival and dismissal. So that was who this bike club reached out to start the conversation, get the conversation rolling. Connect with community partners. So again, in this situation, the group met with the local businesses to to get permission to allow parents and caregivers to park on their property as like a remote drop-off location. Craft clear and consistent messaging so that park a grade away. It's clear messaging, consistent messaging. And again, they started out flyering for 4 weeks, and eventually they didn't need to flyer anymore because people kind of already got the message. Oh, we park over here, students can walk and roll the rest of the way. Communicate often, same idea. So when you have that message, make sure that's communicated over and over and over again. And of course, using momentum to advance, to advocate for other changes. So actually in this case, like this is one success story for improving dismissal, but the bike club, they still want to do other things. They still want to work to, improve overall infrastructure around the school and make it even safer for students to, walk and roll. So their work isn't done. They're still trying to get other, long-term changes in place, but this is just one step in improving the overall safety and comfort, and also joy, because it's fun for students to, roll to school and be a part of the bike train, for the school campus. So that is one example from a school in Oregon. If you have any other examples, feel free to put them in the chat box. We'd be happy to, to see them. And again, if there's anybody who is putting resources in the chat box, I will be sending those out as well. So if you missed something in the chat, don't worry. We will take a look and make sure that you get what you need. And I want to see if there are any questions as well. So somebody asked, Scott, you asked if they had any pushback from homeowners in the 3 and 5 block away parking. I don't know. And actually what I can do is I'll see if I can get permission from this parent who reached out to share his information, because he was the one kind of like leading this effort. So I'm not sure. I do know that pushback from homeowners and or just people living in the area, residents, tenants, can be a big challenge when you are trying to, coordinate remote drop off and pickup. And, some of that community engagement might need to come into practice for those situations. So maybe, I'm not sure, but we do see that coming up a lot. And sometimes, that really just does involve having conversations with people, explaining what you're doing, and trying to find some sort of, common ground and align your priorities around, safety, making sure that everybody feels comfortable. But yeah, that is definitely, definitely a challenge. We have people who, threaten to complain and go to council, and it can get messy. So again, not to deter you, but we do know that that's a challenge. I'm gonna see if there are any other questions here. And yes, I will save the chat. I'll make sure you all get everything that's in here, so don't worry about that. Okay, so before I hand it over to Shandi and Jackson to talk about school streets, which is another interesting arrival and dismissal activity or idea, I do want to point you to 2 more resources. One is the Feet First Arrival and Dismissal Toolkit, which was created for Safe Routes to School Seattle. So there are some really great examples in this toolkit of circulation plans, like I mentioned earlier, some messaging around arrival and dismissal. And then we at the partnership, we also have an arrival and dismissal fact sheet, again, with just some basic strategies around arrival and dismissal. And honestly, like what you all are doing here in the chat, what you do on the Safe Routes to School listserv with just, sharing ideas and stories and resources and strategies. Sometimes you all are your best tool and resource as well. So again, I will, share out the chat and any resources that you drop in there that might be helpful for you. And we also, again, have our Safe Routes to School engineering guide for those of you who are thinking about some longer term engineering solutions to make it easier for students to walk and roll to school. That's another great guide if you're kind of thinking about what infrastructure changes could be made. So I'm going to go ahead and get started chatting a bit about school streets and quickly pass it over to Deshandi and Jackson, who will talk a bit about school streets programs in New York, but these can be applied anywhere. So another really interesting and fun and innovative arrival and dismissal activity could be organizing a school street. And a school street is basically just a street that's open to students who are walking, biking, and rolling, mainly during pickup and drop-off times. Deshandi will go a little bit more into what a school street is and what it looks like. They're usually located in blocks or areas next to a school. The street is actually closed to vehicles and pass-through traffic, and they're open to activities, so walking, biking, rolling, games, sidewalk chalk. They can look like lots of different, there are lots of different setups for school streets. And these are basically spin-offs of kind of play streets, open streets ideas. Some of you might have heard of open streets before. They started in Italy in the 1990s and were introduced, the UK introduced school streets, and now this movement is really growing here, both in the US and also across Europe and Canada. There's also a really great school streets report that came out last April. So if you kind of want to get a sense of, what this actually looks like and kind of dive a bit more into the data. There's a really great report. I think it was put out by the Child Health Initiative School Streets report. So if you want to, get a sense of, just kind of like the research behind school streets, feel free to take a look at this report. And again, it's linked in the slide deck here. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Deshandi, who is from Transportation Alternatives, to talk a bit about a school streets toolkit that was put together to support the New York City school streets program. And again, as you think about school streets and think about your own community, this does not just have to be a big city program or a New York program. You can do school streets in all types of communities. So as Deshandi and Jackson are talking about school streets and open streets, really think about, what this could possibly look like, in your community and what you might be able to adapt. So Deshandi, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right, thanks. Also, apologies for my camera. It's on. I just don't know where it is.
That's okay.
But
and let me go ahead and I will stop sharing. And Deshandi, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to share? Okay.
I'll do that. Right, so my name is Deshandi. I'm the schools organizer with Transportation Alternatives. So we are a nonprofit advocacy organization that do a lot of work around pedestrian safety, vehicular violence, biking infrastructure, things of that nature. So my specific role, I work with schools and youth organizations to implement bike buses, school streets, environmental justice around schools, determine air quality, things of that nature. So today I'm just gonna talk about school streets and how they can benefit your arrival and dismissal process. So Corey already briefly went into what a school street is. So as she explained, this is a street near a school building. A lot of schools use the street in front. It can be the ones on the side, the back. This is a street adjacent to a school building that is closed off to car traffic for certain hours. This includes electric bikes of a certain type and mopeds. So in New York City, the application process goes through the DOT. And so throughout this presentation, I'm going to talk about what the community engagement process tends to look like, what it should look like in order for this process to be as smooth as possible. So some of the benefits of a school street. Oh, there we go. Reduce congestion in vehicles around the school area. And it encourages more walking, cycling, and active journeys. So if you cannot bring your car on the school street, you have no choice but to park elsewhere and walk on. And school-age New Yorkers are at especially high risk when it comes to traffic violence. Children between the ages of 5 and 17 have the highest fatality and serious injury rates of all age groups under 50 in the 5 boroughs in New York City. And during the 8 a.m. hour, which is around the time when most schools begin, And there are over, 1 million children across New York City streaming into over 1,800 public schools. During that time, there are 57% more crashes and 25% more injuries per mile on streets near schools than on other cities' streets. So that's why school street safety is a big solution. It is a big push to create a calmer, safer environment, especially during arrival and dismissal. So I worked with Open Plans. Jackson will speak more about his and Sabina's role, but we spoke to, prior to creating the toolkit, we spoke to many schools and visited schools that had open streets. We spoke to schools that applied for school street that maybe did not they weren't successful in getting one, just to discuss some of their challenges and how we as organizations can provide resources and advocate on their behalf to council members and community boards and things of that nature. So just generally find that it's important to get acquainted with those who are already doing this type of work. So the big examples in New York City is 34th Ave and Jackson Heights, Queens. They have about 7 blocks of school streets that encompasses multiple schools, and they have ESL programming. They do races every day. Kids ride their bikes, their scooters. So there's pretty much like the poster child of what safe routes or a collection of school streets look like in New York City. And speaking with 34th Ave Coalition, we learned, what applicants tend to have the most difficulty with, which was the site plan component. So you'll see in the toolkit, I believe Corey provided that resource for you. We can give an example of what a site plan looks like. It is not as difficult as it sounds or as it seems in the application. It literally is just saying, this is the street we want to block off. These are where we're going to put the barricades. This is where we're leaving room for emergency vehicles at the end. And it was important for us to know that so that we can know how to help other organizations. And it was also important for us to listen to the experiences of others. So the pictures here is from the Wheel School in Washington Heights in New York City. So they use their school streets for educational programming around environmental justice. They also use it for preschoolers to cross from the annex and the trailers, which is shown in the top picture, into the main building. But they had difficulties around cars not moving the barricades due to like limited community buy-in and just getting resources. So when speaking to DOT and council members, it's important to stress those issues, and especially when asking for, programmatic changes and budgeting asks. But for school admins and parents and families who want to get involved, I think it's important to power map. So you want to know who you want to engage. So now in New York City, to get a school street, they ask for 3 reference letters. So the first people that you want to identify are the people who will be in favor of your school getting a school street. So is that a council member? Is that a religious organization nearby? Is that an after-school program? The first people you should think about contacting are those who will sign a letter on your behalf. And I say sign a letter and not write a letter because you want to make the ask as easy as possible. On the Toolkit website, we have sample letters of what a letter would look like, should look like, depending on your target audience. And they say, hey, this is what we're doing to improve arrival and dismissal. This is what traffic violence looks like in our area. This is what congestion looks like during this time. Maybe this is what air quality, whatever your narrative is. We've already written the letter. Will you sign it? It's much easier to get a yes than to ask them, can you write the letter? And also that will just be a lot of back and forth, emails, phone calls. You want to make the ask as simple and targeted as possible. And then also thinking about operating during arrival and dismissal, you really have to get staff and families involved. So if families are volunteering, if you're using paid staff, who is putting the barricades on the street? At what time? If they are not on time, what is our contingency plan? Who is in charge of cleaning the street? So what that means is if there's trash in the morning during this arrival time, if parents and students come with breakfast, who is in charge of that minor sweep? And that is a part many people don't realize that they need to incorporate. And then they get a lot of community backlash about it's blocking off the streets and it's a detriment to the community. So you really want to eliminate and you want to anticipate any questions that folks have. And then after you identify those folks who will be the easiest to support your cause, is then you want to speak with the folks who will have the most backlash. So that can be homeowners. Sometimes it's not in terms of parking spaces. So what happens is some school streets operate where they ask the homeowners to not park on the street during the hours, let's say of 7 to 10, and that works for them. Some school streets say you can leave your car on the street, but it cannot be moved during these hours. So that works for some school streets. But if you are also looking to use your school street outside of arrival and dismissal, let's say physical education, things of that nature, then you're going to have conversations about like we are not liable for damages, and it becomes a much longer conversation. So you want to speak with homeowners. There's a lot of schools in New York City that are located near like parking lots or automobile shops. So those folks who need to be driving on the street. So you want to identify who would be your quote unquote most difficult target audience and appeal your narrative to them. And that goes into my next point about using data to strengthen your narrative. So consider where traffic safety data shows a great number of traffic injuries or deaths, if that is the unfortunate occurrence, within 500 feet of the school grounds over the last 5 years. When people can hear a story, they feel more compelled to act. Consider air pollution levels. Take pictures if need be. This is what congestion looks like. This is what parent pickup looks like. This is what drop-off time looks like, and this is why it's an issue. And also, we know that majority of our students take public transportation or walk or bike. If you can have sort of an informal survey to strengthen your narrative when speaking to these stakeholders. And lastly, what I think is important in speaking with folks about getting the approval for the school street is you want to address common misconceptions that occur with school streets. So many people believe, teachers and school staff will no longer get their, designated parking spot in front of the school. So one or two things can happen. There was a point in time where DOT was able to move parking spots. Not sure if they're doing that anymore or for every school. So you can ask about that. There's also, again, where people implement the rule is you can keep your car there, but it cannot be moved. And and they accept the consequences of that. There's also this myth that full closure streets mean that emergency services cannot get through. Like I stated before, in the site plan is when you designate a 15-foot wide path. And because someone is always on the school street standing by the barricades, it is when you hear the emergency vehicles coming, it is a quick 30 seconds, if even move, for you to clear the pathway that was designated and then resume your activities. And then lastly, school streets are only possible in high density neighborhoods where everyone or most of the students are walking to and from schools. And this is not true. Also, it's New York City, most students and families are taking public transportation anyway, so they still benefit because the point is to have a calming environment around the school, even if you are not walking to the school. When you are in the vicinity of the school, you want parents to engage with their child, you want parents to engage with teachers and things of that nature, and allowing for the space of no vehicles and only walking and rolling allows for that engagement that you wouldn't otherwise get in the rush of, carpooling and pick up and drop off. And I believe that is all. Let me know. Jackson is going to also speak more about school streets and arrival and dismissal. And let us know if you have any questions.
Hey everyone, thank you to Shandi, and great to be with all of you this afternoon or morning, perhaps if you're on the West Coast. My name is Jackson Chabot. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Organizing at Open Plans. Really appreciate Corey for having us on the Safe Routes Partnership. So as Shandi was pointing out, we collaborated as Open Plans with Transportation Alternatives to create the School Streets Toolkit, which I believe is in the chat and will be shared again afterwards. And Deshani covered much of what is in the toolkit and how we thought about the framing. I took quite a few notes, Corey, during your presentation, and so there were many things I thought were really interesting that I'll touch on in a few minutes here. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about support staff and admin and who's doing the physical labor, perhaps of school streets specifically, as well as helping coordinate Safe Routes program. And I think that that's a really significant aspect. The labor aspect of it is really important. In our conversation across New York City, we've found that actually teachers and parents are more of the instigators on the positive end, but more of the instigators of either Safe Routes program or school streets specifically. So I would really encourage all of you to lean on teachers and parents and then work towards administrators in creating this network of support as you all gather your evidence, whether it's qualitative or it's more data and quantitatively oriented as you present the facts to the administration, to whether that's the teacher or parents, or sorry, whether that's the principal or otherwise, or maybe the school district, about why these programs are necessary. I'm going to share my screen quickly here for just a few slides, and then I've got a short video to share, which our colleague Clarence put together via street film. So just a moment. So for the sake of ease and efficiency, I'll leave it like so. But as Open Plans, our work works to transform New York City streets to be truly livable. And I really appreciated, Corey, how you pointed out in your presentation that public space and our pickup and drop off can be safe and joyful. And we use that framing frequently in our work to consider that fundamentally we want our streets and our sidewalks to be safe. And then we want them to be joyful as well, and recognize that they can be both. So a bit about what that looks like for us is something like this, where perhaps people are eating. And again, this isn't necessarily a school street or specifically for a safe route, but think about what is that potential. And we recognize that in New York City, and I think this is true across the country and across the world, that too often streets and sidewalks are treated just as for mobility or movement and primarily for vehicles, but there also are public spaces. And I think particularly at many of our schools in urban contexts, there are front yards, our backyards, that where otherwise there might be limited public space. And so it's not just for students, but imagining for pickup and drop off, that this is also where caretakers, parents, grandparents, aunts or uncles, older brothers and sisters can socialize, and they can kind of meet up with each other. They can have information sharing. They can speak with teachers or administration about what's going on during the day. And I think there's really something to be said about how we create a school community using pickup and drop off as a place, whether it's quickly or more time intensive, to build relationships. Before I came to this work with public space, I was a kindergarten teacher in Oklahoma City as part of Teach for America. And one of the happiest parts of my day was the pickup period at the end of the day, where children would be running around in the playground adjacent to our classroom. And I got to actually interact with the parents and caretakers and build relationships with them. And I think it created a more robust relationship between me and the children, as well as me and the parents. It was really fundamental, not only to the public space, as well as to the larger educational community and what a school can be in the sense of more community oriented. The pickup and drop off was really fundamental in that way. So these are some of the images of how we consider that potential in public space. And again, not just limited to streets and for schools, but thinking about what does this look like and what could this look like in different places? Does it mean that there could be a little block party after school and there could be Jenga, for example? Does it mean that there's kind of a corridor movement Does it mean that people are helping and there's a cleanup day after school kind of thing? Like, how can we build upon what pickup and drop off is if people have more time? How can we emphasize greenery? How can we emphasize infrastructure as well? And that was one of the key takeaways that I had from Corey's conversation, where yes, it's great to have a safe routes to schools program. It's great to have a school street, but these are also very temporal things. And I think as a larger part of our work, we're really focused on improving the infrastructure around schools, whether that's loading zones or bike corrals. And I was really happy to hear from Corey's example that one particular school advocated for the bike corral, bike racks to be closer to the front of school, because that prioritizes and signals values via the infrastructure placement. And I think some of the things we see here, particularly highlight the top right corner with the daylighting, is what are the physical things that might not cost a lot of money, but that we can do to encourage, from a design perspective and infrastructure perspective, that our streets around schools need to be safe, because this has an overlapping benefit, especially during the hours of pickup and drop off, and has a benefit after school hours on weekends for seniors and for everyone, really. So particularly around school streets, a lot of why we as Open Plans are really interested in doing this work and continue to prioritize this is because we recognize, as Deshandi pointed out, that statistics show that the rates of crashes around schools are higher, especially during school hours and when school is in session. And even bigger and more importantly is that streets around schools that are primarily non-white are 43% more dangerous than primarily white schools. And from an equity perspective, this is incredibly important that we have safe routes to schools for every child in New York City and every child in your community too. So that's the end of the short presentation there. And for the sake of time, I'll stop there for Q&A perhaps and share a few links in the chat, but also include my email in the chat. Really happy to connect with any of you if you're located in New York City or otherwise, really, about the work that we do at Open Plans, and particularly about streets around schools, pickup and drop off and beyond. So thanks, Corey, and I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks so much, both, Jackson and Deshandi, for your great examples from, New York. And yeah, just some, ideas about what school streets can look like, things you all can be thinking about. I think that, New York and there are a few other cities that, have school streets programs as well, provide a really nice framework for, how you might be able to implement a school street in your community. And like I mentioned at the top of the top of this section, that school streets just do not always have to happen in big cities and urban communities. They can happen, in small towns and rural communities. Maybe it's not a school street, but it's a school square or, lot or plaza or, other area, laptop, blacktop, or other area around, around your school campus. So consider, thinking about ways to kind of adapt the school street model to fit whatever it is that, that would work and, make sense in your community. And I see that Jackson is also going to add some additional resources into the chat box. There's, a video and, some other information about, how school streets work. So if you want to check those out, again, I'll also send all of those out in the follow-up email. So if you miss them, do not worry. I did also see a few questions in the Q&A box that I wanted to get to. Somebody was asking if any other agencies utilize public transit in place of school district provided transportation. I know a lot of, cities, students get to school using public transit. I don't know if there's anybody else who has that experience, but if so, if you want to drop your information in the chat box, that would be great. Another question about carpooling. Does anybody carpool anymore for pickup and drop off? And if not, could you possibly, kind of create an incentive program around carpooling? Yes, when I talked about incentive programs earlier, I assume that could include, incentives for walking and rolling, which obviously is, a main goal of ours. But if there is more carpooling as a way to kind of cut down on traffic congestion, I assume that there could be incentives around that too. I'm not aware of any that are, currently happening, but that could be one potential strategy to at least get fewer cars, on school campuses during during arrival and dismissal time. I guess you could also, consider if there are carpool situations, like could use that as an opportunity to present a bike train or walking school bus program in place of a carpool. That could also be a starting point for, some of those conversations. So just something else to think about. Have there been any complaints of cut through traffic on local streets as a result of school streets? I know Deshandi, you'd kind of, talked about like emergency vehicles or, other, it's New York City. So there's, there's moving all the time, traffic all the time. I feel like there's also just in general, a lot of complaints around cut through traffic, during arrival and dismissal. I think that it's something that happens. And again, kind of like what both Deshandi and Jackson mentioned, that I think that community engagement piece, so really talking to neighbors and community members and council members and getting that data and kind of crafting your narrative and crafting that story is really important part of this. So whether whether people are concerned about cut through traffic or double parking or losing their parking spot or whatever the case may be, a lot of this really is kind of that relationship building piece, that compromise piece, and finding that common ground. So if the common ground is safety, comfort, joy, how can you find some common ground to make sure that everybody can kind of experience all of those things? So how can everybody be safe? How can everybody be comfortable? How can traveling be convenient? How can traveling be, a more joyful experience for everybody? So, sometimes it's really just hashing it out and talking to people and trying to find some, common ground. And I see there are a few other questions in the chat. So anything that I did not get a chance to answer, I will make sure that I include in our follow-up emails. So we'll save the chat, we will save the Q&A box. You all are also always welcome to, reach out to me afterwards. You have additional, questions, resources, things to share. Like I mentioned, this is a really hot topic. Clearly, there's a lot to discuss. You might want to do an arrival dismissal part 2, just to continue the conversation. But I appreciate you all, sharing your resources, your ideas, and being so generous with your time and expertise. Just a few quick follow-up announcements and I'll wrap us up. We will be having a Safe Routes to School open Zoom networking conversation Wednesday, April 19th. This is when we just, kind of hop on Zoom, chat with each other informally and breakout groups around our work, what we're doing. Those of you who might be interested in talking more about arrival and dismissal, I'm happy to set up a breakout room about this topic specifically. So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know. Just drop a note in the chat and I'll make sure that we get that set up. So a registration link for that will be coming out soon. So keep an eye out for our open Zoom session. And we're also having another Colorado Safe Routes to School webinar, part of that series on April 25th, which will be all about using partnerships between Safe Routes to School and higher education. So colleges, universities, and academic institutions. So if that's, up your alley, you're welcome to join that as well. So again, here's my information. I'll make sure that you all have information for Jackson, Deshandi as well. And thank you both so much for, coming and sharing your School Streets program in New York and providing some really great resources and strategies for implementing School Streets and engaging with community members. I really appreciate you all taking the time to do that. And everybody else, again, thank you so much for being here. I will send out a recording, a survey, and links to all these great resources, links to our upcoming webinars. If there's anything that I missed or that you need from me, please feel free to reach out and let me know. I'm always happy to help. And I will be in touch soon. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, maybe morning for some of you, and we will see you all next time. So thank you so much. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Corey.
Thanks. Thanks, Deshandi. Thanks, Jackson.
See you soon.
Bye.